So as you may or may not know, although most people know if they're vaguely awake, Ben Shapiro and Tom MacDonald have the #1 song in the world at the moment. And it's very comical because it's a rap song. And just the idea of Ben Shapiro doing rap, hip hop is comical in and of itself. It's even more comical because, he's been a critic of that particular genre. So it's very interesting to watch Ben step out of his presuppositions, let's say, and also his domain of previous competence, although he is a musician. Anyways, on with the analysis.
They call me offensive, controversial. It's only 2 genders, boys and girls.
Okay, well, the first thing we might point out here with regards to use of language is that Tom does use genders. And I think that's actually what would you say? That's an interpretive mistake because he should have used sexes. By using genders, he fell into the trap that the leftists have laid with regards to language utilization. They're very, very good at occupying the linguistic terrain. There are a variety of temperaments, and that's easy to get confused with gender, and that's part of the reason we have the problem we have. And sexes would have worked because it's also a 2-syllable word, and it's a minor critique, but in some ways, it seems picayune, which means minor, but it isn't. It's more important than that.
Why did he have to say picayune, which means minor? Like, why not just say minor?
Maybe he couldn't find the word minor, and picayune is the only thing that came to his head.
Yeah, he could find picayune, but not minor. This is off to an awesome start. That, like, we're going to do the line by line breakdown and celebration, and the first thing he says is that it's is to criticize Tom MacDonald and Ben Shapiro's rap song for, like, not hewing to the conservative line enough in the language choices. This is promising.
Yes, I'm always laying traps like that. I'm digging holes, covering it over with leaves to let people like Tom MacDonald fall into.
Andy is like the linguistic Viet Cong. I mean, like they're just like traps. The thing that strikes me as funny about this is just that he's started right off the bat with like critiquing the song for not being purist enough. Jordan Peterson is doing his video where he's like, he clearly wants to celebrate it, but he just can't stop himself from doing right-wing language policing about gender.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
I mean, that's his bread and butter. That's what made him famous. So, that's what he's got to do.
It's definitely not in the same category of the people that they criticize of being super pedantic about what language you use, just on the exact opposite fucking end of the spectrum.
No, it's like the frog and the scorpion, and he's the scorpion, stabbing the frog, drowning, and
it's his nature, right?
We should keep watching, but I guess he's saying he doesn't believe in gender as a concept, right? He's saying,
yeah, I think
there's types. There's only sex, and then there's different types.
I think so. It's a little bit confusing because the way he put it, because he can't just sort of state things straightforwardly, or that, whatever. It's a core brand proposition. He has to talk around everything in a way.
Yeah.
But I think his point was just that we shouldn't make a distinction between sex and gender because, there lies, that's the part of the linguistic terrain where there are, dragons and they thems, so you can't you can't go there, right? You have to you have to stick with just sex, although it is confusing because he put in that thing about temperaments, and that felt like half a point that he never quite got to.
Yeah, and it also just seems like one of those like bunk philosopher moves when you just use a different word, where you're like, I know he's gonna say something different about it, but it's like there's not genders, there's just different types. Like you could be, biologically a male but act extremely female, but you're not actually a different gender, and it's like, well, all right, man. I don't know. Let's move on.
Because if you let your political opponents gain the linguistic territory, then they win, right? You can't, once you use their words, they win. So that's something for everybody to keep in mind.
You can't cancel my message because I'm the biggest independent rapper in the whole freaking world. Claim that I'm racist, yeah, alright. I'm not ashamed because I'm white. If every Caucasian's a bigot, I guess every Muslim's a terrorist. Every liberal is right.
So with regards to every Caucasian being a bigot and his claim that then therefore every Muslim is a terrorist and every liberal is right, which is, definitely not correct, especially if you're talking about the progressive mob. The fundamental problem with there's a variety of fundamental problems with the woke algorithm, reductive algorithm or ideology that Ben and Tom are criticizing. We did research back in 2016 looking at politically correct authoritarianism, and that was back when psychologists were just starting to analyze left-wing authoritarianism. And we found that the best predictors of being a left-wing authoritarian were being not verbally intelligent. That was a walloping predictor. It was the variable most closely associated with intelligence that I had ever seen, including grades. And so if you're not very bright, the woke ideology is very attractive to you. The second best predictor was being female. The third best predictor was having a female temperament. The fourth best predictor was ever having taken a course that had the woke ideology as a portion of it. Now, we are noting all over the world now that men and women's political beliefs are segregating. And so that's a reflection of the fact that this woke ideology is also a perversion.
Where is this published?
Okay, I'm looking at
scientific.
I'm looking at clarifying the structure and nature of left-wing authoritarianism in the National Library of Medicine PubMed abstract. And it says
so that's let's be real clear on that, right? That's not a publication, right? That's just like a database.
Okay.
Okay, yes. That sounds right. And it says, relative to right-wing authoritarians, left-wing authoritarians were lower dogmatic and cognitive rigidity, higher in negative emotion, and expressed stronger support for a political system with a substantial centralized state control.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to know how both terms are being defined here. Like, what's the like how they're defining authoritarianism and right and left, whatever. I'm not. I'm very. Let's put it this way. This is the kind of thing that, on the face of, I'd be very suspicious about what the methodology is. I also think it's just kind of a dumb genre thing. I mean, I feel like about 10 years ago, I saw a lot of stuff going around that was like, it's like, oh, here's this study that shows that, conservatives are more likely to be, afraid of loud noises or whatever. And my liberal friends would pass it around and be very smug about it. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It seems like most of these studies aren't really worth much. In this particular case, a lot of this is like, I'm not a fan of the guy overall at all, actually. But John Oliver, many years ago, had this really good segment on studies where he does, he goes through like all of these like news announcers and new study shows that, right? And like they clearly, and it's clearly like always something that's like has like a teensy tiny sample size and it's probably not reproducible, or at least hasn't been reproduced, and it'd be crazy to actually draw very many conclusions from it. But like lazy journalists sort of read press releases, they're like, oh wow, and like this is how you end up getting people believing that plants can think and coffee cures cancer, because
wait, what?
Studies show
that like it's not true.
It's also and also it's an ad hominem, right? So he's saying that you are dumb if you believe this, but that doesn't actually take down the idea, let alone the idea that like it just doesn't pass the smell test. But we definitely don't have enough time.
The thing that in particular makes this not pass the smell test to me is that they like putting aside all the kind of larger reasons to think that he's making a a genre of claim that usually turns out to be bullshit. But putting that aside, even the really specific thing that makes this not pass the smell test is that one of the things that you said predicted being a left-wing authoritarian was having a female temperament.
Well, I haven't heard that, but maybe I haven't. It's because I haven't taken like a social psych course recently enough. Is that like cutting edge? And then one of them was like, that it correlates with learning about that kind of stuff in college. That one is the only one that I'm like, that's almost definitely true. And that is one of the most benign things I've ever heard. I mean, the idea that like people who are woke, woke, as he says, that tend to have taken, correlating college courses. I don't know if that's a cause and effect thing. It might be, it might be that they're interested
that they seek
in that
out those
subject
courses,
matter.
but however the causation's running, it's like, people with certain kinds of like this sort of thing he has in mind, right? Or like probably, yes, indeed have been exposed to stuff at college. That's not surprising or interesting, but yes, the part of it that makes me wonder about the scientific bona fides of this more than anything else is this like, it turns out that we that you're more likely to fall into the left-wing authoritarian part of our spectrum on the graph if you have a womanly mind.
And you know how you define having a womanly mind? It's actually being woke. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some circular or there's some like a lot of overlap on that Venn diagram, of what defines a woke person.
It wasn't a Venn diagram. It's just a pair of boobies.
There are only two genders, boys and girls, but also even if biologically you're a boy, if you believe a lot of pansy woke stuff, you're basically a girl.
Yeah. It was 99% women and women and womanly men, which was 50% women and 49.9% womanly men. But anyway, let's see.
It's also just funny because it's like the whole thing. It's like, right, sure. The college finding is like, as you say, is like kind of the only part I believe. But that's extremely unsurprising because in fact a lot of what people are often talking about when they use words like wokeness or social justice or whatever, it's like there's always this haze of vagueness around these terms, but like I think a lot of what people are gesturing at is stuff like a certain kind of annoying progressive language policing that people are, like almost requires having gone to college, right? That in order to know how to play the rules of the game correctly. But it's like, man, that's so annoying. Like, God, don't you hate that? What we really need is some nice conservative language policing.
Exactly.
The basic female ethos. It's the extension of compassion far beyond its relevant domain. And it's an extension as a consequence of pride. So the women who are doing this, there's men who are doing it too, especially those that have a more feminine temperament. They're making the claim that their love is so encompassing that everything can be brought into the circle, right? Even the snake. And that's the eternal sin of Eve, by the way. So there's a group identification claim. The fundamental claim essentially is
Okay, I'm sorry. The sin of Eve, the eternal sin of Eve, is extending the circle of compassion to snakes.
Well, I hate to get very Freudian about this, but
okay.
the world can be divided into victims and victimizers. The victims are like infants. They're always good. They're always innocent. The victimizers are essentially predators. So you can see the feminine ethos in that. The problem with that is when you start to apply it to groups, you completely demolish the presumption of individual innocence. And there's no difference between the demolition of that presumption and the imposition of a totalitarian state. So you might say there can't be that much information in those few lines, but The whole point of poetry.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I actually agree with him here. I just am really skeptical that conservatives aren't doing this for woke people too. Seems like they're demonizing the left in the same way. I agree that the left will pay, like we talked about this with Palestine and Israel, right? Of like getting rid of the individuality of Palestinians by assuming that Hamas speaks for all of Palestine, right? So I agree with him on that point. I just really haven't, from what I've seen from him, I just really don't believe that he does the same thing when it comes to the left, because he paints this for such a ridiculously broad brush when it comes to like woke and feminine. He's always talking in these huge archetypes. So I don't know. I was with him on that point, but I just really don't like the messenger on that point. You know what I mean? Because I see him making these broad generalizations all the time. I don't know. But
I'm with you. Like I think there's like, look, as with a lot of things that Jordan Peterson says, there's like a core that's like fine. But it's expressed in the most like hyperbolic, hysterical possible way, and also with like zero self-awareness about how any critique he's making of others might apply to himself. In this case, it's like, if you are essentializing people, in terms of group identities, then there's a, like, you're not, treating them as individuals, which is bad. Fair enough with him so far. The way he expresses that is presumption of innocence, which is like, okay, we're using this in a, metaphorical way, but I'm following the thought. Is like, then you have a totalitarian state. It's like, wait, what? Right? Okay. Like that's because I guess we've suddenly switched from using presumption of innocence in a metaphorical way to like actually talking about like legal systems.
That's true. That's true.
And it's like now there's a totalitarian state. That's I mean, just, I don't know, man. You got to calm down a little bit about this stuff. But like, the original critique, is basically fine, even if it's being, even if the volume's turned up to 11. But I totally agree with you. I mean, it's like, come on, man. Like, that's like, you're not, you're not painting entire groups of people with broad brushes. You just finished telling me that like anybody who believes in, like all the political beliefs that you're calling, far left authoritarianism or whatever, wokeness, whatever, are all like stupid, and that it's because they have women's minds, not men's minds, and like, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of empathy in treating people as individuals and all of that.
A dense poem, which is the use of words to produce images, can have levels of meaning that are almost inexhaustible. That's partly why we remember poetry and poetic verse, let's say, image-laden poetic verse. We'll remember that for centuries because it's literally inexhaustible. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Two really quick points. One, part of the reason I pause is just so funny to me to hear him talk about like poetry and like why poetry is enduring. While he's talking about the fucking Tom McDonald and Ben Shapiro novelty rap song. And it's also really funny because I can remember Ben Shapiro was like obsessed for a while, Jordan Peterson was obsessed for a while with how much he hated the movie Frozen. And how it's not like a real myth, because like a real myth, like there are layers of meaning, and you can't say it's just about one thing. But Frozen, you can say exactly what it's about because it so clearly has a message. It's like, wow, all right. Now let's apply it to the Tom McDonald and Ben Shapiro political rap song. But then my other point, which is much more prosaic, is just, I don't know if he's actually started to do it more, or if for some reason I've just been noticing more in the Jordan Peterson clips we're watching tonight. But is he talking with his hands more or in a stranger way lately? Because like all this stuff while he's talking, like, I don't know, it like both in this and the clip we watched in the main show, it looked really odd to me.
No, he's always kind of done that. Okay. I've looked at far too many pictures of him, and
it's like, what, because it's not like talking with your hands in a normal way where you're kind of doing this stuff, right? It's like this is like
It's like
This is like the gesture that you make, like when you're tripping and like your fingers are making little trails in the air behind them, and you're staring at it.
Yeah, it's like he's like fondling the idea, I feel like, and like sort of like conjuring it from the ether, I think is what he's going for. It's very like, yeah, bells and whistles, I think.
I think he's just watched too many Bond villains and is trying to emulate that kind of evil thing, but failing at it because he has a slightly effeminate brain.
It's like, well, a complex picture is worth a lot more than 1,000 words, and words can bring images to mind.
I don't want to talk to folks who don't get it. Go woke, go broke, no hope is pathetic.
Okay. Go woke, go broke. It's a nice rhyme, but there's something there too. And what Tom is pointing to is that if you construe yourself as a victim and you develop and you have an external locus of control, that's the technical term from the psychology
That's not what the fuck he's saying.
literature, then you believe that you are nothing but a pawn of circumstances that are beyond your control.
Absolutely not what he said.
You adopt the guise of powerlessness. Now, if you could gain a moral advantage from that, that's a secondary gain. That's how that would be interpreted from a psychoanalytic perspective. It's doing something that isn't good for you.
Wait, real quick, it would be like if someone said "fuck Biden" and then you, Ben, were like, what he's actually saying, "fuck Biden," is that from a Marxist perspective, he's saying, it's like, yeah, that is your theory about why fuck Biden, but that doesn't mean that just by saying "fuck Biden," you're invoking all of the same ideas that Jordan Peterson. Like, that's why you think "go woke, go broke," but that doesn't mean.
That's like just not at all like what he means when he says. Tom McDonald means when he says "go woke, go broke," is that if you're like pandering to wokeness in your movie or TV show, or like the decisions you're making about your sports league or whatever, then the audience is going to punish you and you're going to lose money, right? That's what he's saying. It has literally nothing to do with anything.
Not the external locus of control, but anyway, yeah, that was so dumb.
Like, he's not making a point about like how the psychology of wokeness is going to be bad for being a go-getter, who's going to like climb up the ladder. Like, this is I mean, although I did think as I was watching that, man, I really want to see Jordan Peterson watching just some normal rap song and applied this same technique where he wants to interpret every lyric as like a really insightful expression of whatever he thinks.
I want it specifically to be Biggie and Michael Brooks to actually break down that video.
I want him to do that in the new Ice Spice single, which is you think you the shit, you ain't even the fart. I want
He's like, no, this is really true. I mean, what Ice Spice is saying here.
Because there's a payoff. And so if you construe yourself as a victimizer, you only believe you're moved about by external forces. You won't develop a vision of your own.
No,
and that will mean that you're anxious and confused because you're being buffeted around by the winds of external forces. It'll mean you have no direction in your life, and that makes you hopeless. The combination of those two things will mean that you have no motivation. And the consequence of that, and we know this perfectly well because highly motivated people are much more likely to be economically successful. The consequence of that is that you won't have any money. And then, of course, you'll use that to buttress your claim to victim status, and then you're in a loop. That's the dragon that eats its own tail, by the way. That's a symbol of chaos. And then you're basically in hell. So I wouldn't recommend that, as a clinical psychologist, which I still am, by the way. So, all right, next line.
Pro-choice pronouns, pro-love, you're progressive, but you ain't pro-gun, no one to protect you.
Okay, now here's something else to understand. So imagine that you're, compassionate in your basic ethos. So you have a more feminine temperament. You're high in agreeableness. Now, but you're also full of pride, and so you want to overclaim the utility of that and bring everything to you, clutch the poisonous serpent to your breast, as I pointed out. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Well, this has been modeled very well, even computationally. We understand this. Make no mistake about that. So imagine you set up a society that's full of agreeable people who do nothing but cooperate. Fine, and they all get along, and that can be extraordinarily productive as long as people keep acting in that reciprocally altruistic manner, which means you treat someone well and they treat you well back. That can be extremely productive. And that's actually the basis of a productive society. One of the bases. It's not enough though, because you need enforcement. And that's why you need men with spines. And the reason for that is that if you have a whole community of cooperators and you drop one cheater into the mix, one shark, he will eat everything. And so you can see this, you see this happening, for example, when Seattle set up its progressive city.
That's not true. I feel like
they
don't
sure
think woke people.
That's sure not my experience.
Yeah, my biggest critique of woke people is that they're very non-cooperative. I'm gonna you know what I mean, like the idea of a wrecker and DSA or something like that. It's because they're letting their like, you know, their one specific critique or problem jettison the entire project. I don't. It just doesn't really scan for what he's talking about. Even with my critique of the people he's talking about.
No, exactly. This is like the Michael Brooks joke about how it'd be a big problem if the American left ever had to go up to the mountains like Castro's guerrillas, you know, because like at the meeting to decide on it, you know, you'd have the person who'd say going up to the mountains is ableist, and you know that
a place of victimized people run by the hyper compassionate, the bloody thugs move in, and then you better watch yourself. And if you think that's not, and then of course if you're if you're prideful and hyper compassionate, you're going to think, oh, the poor thugs, they just had it rough when they were children, you know, and a lot of them did. But I'll tell you something else about that, and that is that there's a lot of people who had it rough as children who don't turn into like psychopathic thugs. And all you hyper compassionate people who are out there like feeling sorry for the criminals, you wait till they show up in your bloody house. You'll be thinking twice about that. And we've seen no shortage of that on the victimized liberal side, people who get mugged out in the street after they defund the police and short circuit because, oh my God, look, I got attacked. It's like, yeah, well, you enabled the psychopaths, and I wouldn't recommend that. So that's what happens. Compassion, defund the police, no protection, rule by psychopath. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that.
Well, I wouldn't recommend it either, but I would point out if you read Jason's latest in Symbolism, he talks about this a little bit. You know how many police departments in the United States are actually funded less now than they were in 2019? None of them. Yeah. Right? Like this is certainly at least in major cities. Maybe there's like a small town somewhere. Like, but if so, it wasn't because of it's not because of political activism. It's just because the town's broke. Like, that's not, you know, they like, yeah, there's a lot of talk about defunding the police in 2020. And there were, you know, there were a couple of cities that actually did vote for like some kind of budget cut of, you know, initially, but like those were all reversed later, right? Like the funding's gone up like pretty much everywhere. So, so that's one thing. The other thing that's like actually, you know, maybe too earnest for the exercise of watching this video, but you know, that is actually a serious point I want to make here is when he's talking about the bloody thugs and how sure a lot of them, you know, had it rough, but lots of people have it rough and don't become bloody thugs. Yeah, okay, right, but also. At least in the sense he means, very few people grow up in affluent suburbs and become bloody thugs.
Yeah.
So if you accept that there's a range in human responses to extreme situations and that, you know, most people, thank God, you know, don't end up like embracing the worst responses, it could still be true that like, what's the main driver of this, right? Like that, like if you say like, yeah, under horrible economic circumstances, most people aren't going to join gangs, but under better economic circumstances, like no people are going to join gangs. So if your goal isn't just to like shake your finger at people on YouTube, like you actually want to do something in the real world that's going to lead to there being less violent crime, then, you know, like the economic intervention is still going to be the most effective there. And honestly, it shouldn't take that much thought to see how that's compatible with his premise.
And all of his points are just always based on a straw man caricature of what a liberal or a leftist would believe, just because I assume most reasonable leftists, and I wouldn't say that, of course, there are people I would consider pretty unreasonable or bad thinkers on the left, just as there is in any political tendency, right? But for most normal people, you would say that, at least by the way we function in society, is that there's some continuum of what we believe beyond, everyone is completely responsible for their own actions, and we shouldn't take the Kamala coconut tree thing that just went viral. I don't know if you guys saw that, but the point is that like obviously there's some continuum between every person is only responsible for his own actions without taking into account anything that happened to them, right? Versus the extreme of saying that like no one has any personal responsibility and I don't blame a murderer. I think most people believe that the truth is more nuanced than that, right? And any reasonable person should believe that. But his caricature of that is that like, if you think that there's like too much police brutality or that, you have some compassion for criminals, it's because you think that like they aren't at all responsible for their own actions. But it's just it's a very, very stupid and reductive parody of what anybody believes, in my opinion, or the people, or anyone who believes that are just outliers.
Where the American flags at? Remember when people would hang those? They've been taken down, they've all been replaced with BLM flags or a rainbow.
Okay, so the flag idea, man, that's a complicated idea. So the idea of a flag is something like the idea of a staff. And a staff, well, you have a staff if you run a business, and a staff is something you rely on. A staff is something that supports you. A staff is something that moves you forward. A staff is something that helps you find your way. A flag is a staff with a banner. And so the banner is something around which everyone can unite.
What type of
a flag is a uniting symbol. Okay, so what's a rainbow flag? Well, let's think about it. It's a flag of division. Literally, because a rainbow is the division of a unity, what's white, into a plurality, what's a rainbow. And you can't have a unity of plurality. Well, you can in a world where a man can be a woman, you can have a unity of plurality. And I'll tell you, that's the reign of utter chaos. Now, we already pointed out that the reign of utter chaos brings in the psychopaths, the true oppressors, the real victimizers. And so, this pride flag, what would you say? Waving, this proclamation, this praying in the streets, this false moralizing is a way of, once again, proclaiming to the world that your compassion is so overwhelming and inclusive that you can love the whole world, and that's fine, except for the snakes. And, you can imagine why women do that, because in some ways they want to advertise to men that they're going to be good mothers, and that is what they're doing, even if they don't know it. And then you might ask, well, why would men do it? And I'll tell you what sort of men do that. The sort of men who do that have no masculine utility whatsoever. And so they ape feminine utility. They act like girls. That's a good way of thinking about it. Then they can be a friend. Well, hopefully a friend with sexual benefits, right? And so loser men use false compassion pridefully as a way of attracting stupid women. And they're particularly good at doing that if they're psychopathic. And the data on that are very clear, because young women, especially naive young women, are much more likely to be sexually victimized by psychopaths and narcissists. And you might ask, well, how will the psychopaths and narcissists close themselves? And the answer is that they're not going to come out with shark teeth on, man, because then you'd know who they were. They're going to tell you how nice they are, how lovely they are, and how they care for everything in the world. It's like, you better take that with a grain of salt, because if you don't, you're going to pay for it. So we'll get back to that particular motif as we progress.
I think we was that no notes, right? That was perfect. I think.
I
mean, he's been saying a lot of, kind of controversial or questionable stuff, but I think he's back on solid ground. And I actually kind of I apologize for critiquing him earlier. This was
if you know that he was going somewhere as reasonable as what we just watched, then it's like, okay, I wouldn't have given him such a hard time about the things that he said that were slightly wrong earlier. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.